Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have with us once again Dr. Buck Melton, how can I say this, a savant well known in this part of the world for his insights into truth.
Well,
Is that, did
I don't know how
overstate that?
true. I don't know how
Did I
true it
overstate
is.
that?
So
Did I overstate that? Well, okay.
Thank you for the compliment.
Well, we've had general conversations. Tonight, let's have one of the most general ones that one can undertake. Let's discuss the fate of our species. The Homo sapiens, there are 8 billion of us. We're on a little spinning orb, the third planet from the sun, in the middle of an insignificant solar system, in the middle of an insignificant galaxy, in the middle of whatever, on and on. Just a small little part of reality, and that's just yet all we have. And the things that seem to be happening are very worrisome to me for these 8 billion people and what I've observed in my lifetime. I would say that I grew up in the Cold War, and it looked like America had its Dunkirk in Vietnam, very similar to Dunkirk. We'd lost, everything, it looked really dark for the American ideals and our country. And then bingo, the Soviet Union blew up. The Soviets crashed. Communism, whatever that was, crashed. And there appeared we had a decade or two where, boy, it looks like we're approaching Paradiso. All the difficulties that we had in the past are going to be alleviated by science, by human understanding, and we'll all get along just fine.
You remember Francis Fukuyama's very controversial article, The End of History, that came out in the mid-90s, saying now that the Cold War is over, it's onto those broad sunlit uplands.
Yes, and actually that's what I'm going to say is no, this doesn't seem to be happening. Instead, we might have to say that history is cyclical, and in other words, it just repeats itself. To say that it might not totally repeat itself, but it rhymes. So
Mark Twain, yes.
Yes, did he say that? He was the person.
I believe he was the one who said that.
Well, it's certainly a phrase that's in vogue these days. Mm-hmm. But in any event, we have what the Bible might speak about it, war and rumors of wars, always having this. Well, we're certainly having it. And when these wars occur, as they seem to be constantly occurring, then in the end, it would be a big chance, in my opinion, that horrific destruction would happen. Our small little ecosystem here could be ravaged, nuclear winter, nuclear holocaust, death, plague, all kinds of social disruptions. So how tightly wound we are. We don't have subsistence farming, particularly. No one in America really does that much, and so we would just be dependent on the subtle destructions of anything could have this horrific event or cause these terrible suffering. And the question comes up is why is our world order failing? Why is that? Why did we not get there? And why are these wars taking place? And is this an intrinsic part of our brain? That we have this, as I've said a number of times, we have a bicameral brain, we have a dark, seemingly necessary rhinoencephalon, the alligator brain that causes you to want to have a nice hamburger, or if you see an attractive lady, you're interested in making her acquaintance, whatever the story is there. And if somebody steps on your foot, you tend to growl or step on theirs possibly, and that's part of our basic neuroanatomy. And then we have, as I said, the neocortex, a whole different part of the brain that has six layers, cellular layers, and that's where we have reason, we have intellect, we can communicate, we can get along with each other, and the two are in this delicate balance. And it seems like things just go off the rails. What should we do about it? What do we have is there anything that could be done now as we see these events taking place in the Ukraine, in the Middle East, and possibly in Taiwan, and all kinds of people are angry out there. There's tremendous disparities you've spoken about before in the country in wealth, but even more than that, disparities in the world and how people live, these 8 billion people, many people, billions of them, live in terrible circumstances. And what are we going to do about that? What are your thoughts on this?
I don't know.
Well, wait a second. I expected, after I gave you the big build-up about your what a great savant you are, you can't give us a good reason to any hope for that?
Well, I'll class myself with Socrates. He was the wisest man because he knew nothing.
Yes.
So I just gave myself a big pat on the back there, I guess. But yes, I mean, I can spot what I think are some of the big problems, but how we would go about handling those problems and diffusing them are an entirely different thing. And I think that probably the root thing that you mentioned is just our evolutionary biology, that these very strong survival traits that were great for the species at some point, 2 million years ago, 100,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, are now the things that are going to doom our species. That it seems to me that we're a failed evolutionary experiment. And you mentioned war a lot, and I gravitate to that a good bit. And I think about the Industrial Revolution and what that meant for war. I think about Herman Wouk, who really was, I think, one of the great historian philosophers of our generation. And at one point...
Interesting name in these days.
Yes.
Wouk. Okay.
Yes.
You can make a joke, but yes.
But at one point he had Pug Henry say that the means of war now dwarf the ends, that to any rational thinker, the cost of war is going to far outstrip, or at least the potential cost of war is going to far outstrip any conceivable benefit you can get from it. And it's interesting that from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, generally speaking, the side that starts the war thinking we can just get one good quick knockout punch in and then we can win this thing, has been the side that's usually lost. And so this idea that war is an acceptable recourse now just doesn't work. And since the means dwarf the ends, Pug Henry just says tellingly, either war is finished or we are. But to make sure that war is finished, we've somehow got to rewire the brain. And a lot of science fiction writers have looked into that, who have thought about that. And the franchise that immediately comes to mind is the 2001 franchise, which I'm sure in your heyday 2001 was the big epic that came out, and you actually see at the end of it a human being reborn into a new being of some sort with a cosmic awareness and understanding. One of the sequels to that, 3001, takes place about 1,000 years from now, and it involves Frank Poole, one of the doomed astronauts, being reanimated 1,000 years later and being reintroduced to a much more advanced, technologically advanced society. And one thing they do is they can and do essentially map the brains of every individual, and if there's any kind of deviance or any kind of social deviance or pathology there, then I forget what they do. I think they essentially short circuit that person and turn them into sort of a serf that can't make any trouble.
Yes.
Is that what it's going to take? And disturbingly, that's sort of what Orwell has the big brother and the government talking about doing in 1984. We're going to remap everything. We're going to remap the brain. And is that the direction that utopia lies? I don't know. Can we do it? And if so, will we do it? And if so, is that a good thing to do?
Well, I won't get too, I don't want to get too profound in our conversation, or maybe it's unavoidable to at least,
I think it is
ponder these imponderables. But that's true enough. Science fiction awaits us. But just from a practical point of view, right now, in the first part of the what century are we in? The 21st.
21st,
I think I forget sometimes. But
and the thing that I'm going to interrupt here, that when I was a kid, and I'm willing to bet when you were a kid too, the idea of the 21st century was so futuristic, and of course science fiction was set in the 21st century, but. For the last 20 or even 30 years now, To think that there are people walking among us who will live to see the 22nd century is just very mind-bending.
Well, the word to add to that is hopefully.
Yeah,
hopefully,
if
hopefully,
something doesn't,
hopefully,
if the apocalypse
hopefully.
does not
But
occur. So.
just to address the situation, I mean, I go back to the League of Nations that failed, and we had these the end of history kind of time.
Yes.
The United Nations was going to be the enforcer of some kind of world.
Collective security.
That they were going to just watch things, and then the big players would all be in the same room, and we'd say, yes, we just can't allow the things that happen. And many of them that happen are just totally non-publicized. For instance, one thing was in Armenia, Azerbaijanis seized a large enclave of Armenian land. They displaced everybody, and then they're moving in, biting more of it away, and they call Armenia Western Azerbaijan land, and these things are happening, and there's some and hopefully or possibly it would not have happened at an earlier a decade or two ago. Russia would have stepped in and been the player that preserved peace. And it seems like the strong world powers were going to be in the same room and would say, we just have to look after our general. We can't allow these war. We just can't allow war. We just can't let that happen. We can't let people fight with each other. It's just too destructive. It's too small of a place. We just have to get these issues resolved some other way. And it doesn't seem like there's power to do that. And what finally happens if you're the predisposition of the brain when the organism is under stress is to really let the alligator emerge, and particularly with your group. So this is my group, whatever that is, and the people are stepping on our toes. And the only option we can't appeal to the United Nations. There's no higher court of justice, so to speak, on the planet. We'll just punch these guys out, and we'll get allies. We can be their client state. We'll find ways to punch them out. It's sort of a rejig of the Peloponnesian Wars, the same old story that our species has been enmeshed in forever. And my opinion is this just can't keep going like this. And indeed, right now, you could imagine how far are we away from some kind of tectonic, terrible interchange between great world powers that decide the only way their group can prevail is to destroy the other group, and that's it seems to be what's playing itself out.
Well, I have a student. Both my wife and I actually share a student. He's taken several of our courses, and he's very bright, very lit. He really very closely follows current events. I mean, we wish all students would do this. And he keeps on coming back. It's like a mantra. He says, but globalization, the day of the nation state is over, and we're also interconnected now. And he says this like it's going to be the great solution. And I say, yeah, you're giving a rational argument, and maybe it makes sense, but the human brain is not rational. That this is exactly what many people were saying on the eve of World War I. They were saying the international banking system created this network that was so crucial that they wouldn't possibly allow a war to happen. There was no benefit in a war happening. Well, look what happened. We get what is arguably the worst war in human history because it was the suicide of Europe, which, for better or worse, owned and operated the entire planet at that time. Now, maybe it needed to be dismantled, but the way in which it was dismantled was a frightful way, which made the 20th century the most blood-drenched century in our history so far. I hope forever, but we'll have to wait and see about that. The neuroanatomy, we keep on going back to it. You ask for practical solutions. We can't map each individual human brain at this point. One thing that strikes me that is within our technological ability, it is certainly not within our willpower. we need to start having fewer children. The planet, the ecosystem cannot sustain 8 billion people. The resources are not sufficient for 8 billion people all to have what we in the West would think of as a decent standard of living. It leads to ethnic tensions. It leads to fights over resources. It's leading to a breakdown of the ecosystem and the environment that keeps us all alive. So we just all need to drastically cut back on the number of children. But you see no real serious move in that direction. And in fact, some people are encouraging more children so they can take over the neighboring state.
Well, I mean, getting into the propensity of humans to be in a group, the pleasures of being in a group, and the pleasures of having an out-group. So it's, and I think you could see it with football teams. It's just, or gangs, street gangs, or it just is a very, if you could say normal, maybe that's the wrong word, but it's just what happens. So people want to be in a group and they get all the comfort of being in a group. Well, my group, we always wear sandals or whatever the deal is, and we're so much better than people that wear shoes. And then you can cast it, there's a great deal of ego support with your fellow group members. Oh, that other group is terrible, whatever. And to me, I think an outlet for that are sports. I think that's a tremendous, really good, positive thing. And yet, having sports, your group can painlessly, they can, I don't know, Georgia can play Alabama, and sometimes Georgia wins, sometimes they lose, but it purges a lot of this, I guess, instinct.
And yet to follow that and to show the close connection and the pathology. I remember this has been, about 15 years ago, that the really, of course, strong rivalry between Alabama and Auburn. Some crazed Alabama fan, the Oaks at Auburn.
Are there such creatures? I don't know.
No,
okay,
but the and I forget what they're called.
A crazed football fan.
But I forget what they're called, the Auburn Oaks or whatever, and these ancient
they cut them
oak
down,
trees.
I think.
No, he didn't cut them down. He went, and he's an Alabama fan. He went and dumped massive amounts of poison on those trees, and then after the poison had had time to do its work, he then called into a talk show and was really proud and said, those trees are going to die, roll damn tide. Well, the trees did die. Luckily, they did apprehend this person and they did send him to jail where he should. I mean, I hate to say this, my misanthrope is showing, but those trees were more valuable than he was. And so, yeah, this shows that line between healthy outlet and the kind of violence that that we need that healthy outlet for. Well, and he couldn't make the distinction. There are plenty of people like him.
Well, nevertheless, yeah. I'm going to propose that as a really good thing. And the thing that I'm sort of going to get into is the idea that power makes right. And so if you look at sort of what's going on, if there's particularly in different disputes, you could look at the Russian-Ukrainian issues. Well, says Russia, I'm the big dog. I've got the power to do this. And in my world, all of this ideology about right and wrong, no, that's nothing. It's power. If you've got the power, you make the right. And which I think could be a point, is that after wars, the people that write the histories are the winning side, and so they castigate the other side, whatever it is. They praise their generals. Our side was right, isn't this great? And that's a really deadly, it's a very deadly concept. And
well, it's the Euthyphro dilemma. Does God say something is right because it is, or is something right because God says it is? Might makes right. So if God says that serial rape is good, does that make it good?
Well, it depends. If God is the player, Putin is obviously not that person. And the deal, that philosophy has been out there for a long time. And then we've hoped that, well, actually we're going to sit in a room and we'll discuss this, and we have some ethical standards. And then from this idea, we'll come up with what, from a religious, philosophical point of view, would be the correct path to take. And that conversation can be quite tedious and difficult. And so players involved in the conversation seem, well, I'm just going to not settle this way. I'll blow you up, and then that'll prove what's right. As particularly if power has been, people have seen these issues dealt with by power. And so the idea would be, I'm going to get enough power, my group will get enough power that we can destroy the other group, and we won't have any substantial interchange about how to work this out.
Yeah, I think the danger is, the idea, we go back to the UN and the idea that the really big heavy hitters, the superpowers, will act unilaterally against the non-superpowers to say, we're just not going to do this. But if the two superpowers have radically different agendas and worldviews, is there a danger that one might try to game the system and think, well, the other superpower thinks we're their partner, we can use that to our advantage to bury them, in Khrushchev's words. And you can even take one more regression beyond that. What if one superpower says, well, we would never play dirty, but we believe the other one will play dirty, so that forces us to game the system and try to topple them, even though we wouldn't do this of our own volition. So once again, the mutual suspicions there. It puts me in the mind, back to science fiction, Star Trek, the very first season of Star Trek, which is in many ways the best season of all 60 years of Star Trek's, Errand of Mercy, when the Klingons are introduced. And
they were pretty unsavory.
Yes, and Kirk and the Klingons are, they're fighting on this planet, and they are there are two battle fleets in space, headed towards each other. And then the owners of this planet suddenly reveal themselves as omniscient, omnipotent beings composed of pure energy. And they make all the weapons literally too hot to handle. And Kirk, who was sent there to try to defuse the situation, says to the Organians, how dare you interfere in our battle? We have the right to fight and kill each other. And the Organians simply say, and we're putting a stop to it. And so the Organians are sort of the overboss that we kind of envision that the United Nations ought to be, an apolitical, all-powerful entity that can just make us quit appealing to our baser instincts, whether we would do that or not. But is there such a thing like that in the world? Of course not, and that's the scary thing.
Is there an intoxication with violence? And then I'll ask this: is this a male kind of thing? Testosterone,
I think absolutely.
the way, and then in some ways have males, been marginalized by the world? I mean, if you don't study, you like to drink beer and watch football games, and you don't study, whatever. I mean, it's going to be a difficult path for you, and your whole. If you make fun of the teacher, that you don't do your homework. A lot of adolescent male behavior blocks their path in the world, and that actually the females might be more suited. Their more social impact or social arrangements may make them a little easier. I'm probably overstating this, but I probably am. Other people might disagree, but okay, fine. And then the males, in many ways, their protective instincts. Well, how can I protect anyone? I don't have a job, or what's up here? My real deal is shooting people, kind of, if I can say it that way. And that's a sexist comment on your part, Dr. Robinson. Females like to shoot people. They may well, but I would submit not quite as much. They might not quite get as much.
Well, our testosterone makes us more capable of hunting the saber-toothed cat, and we are more dispensable as individuals than women are, if you're talking about the survival of the species. So I think those two things kind of select for testosterone. But the more I look at it, when I see how superior women are in most regards, it's just amazing that practically every major civilization on earth is a patriarchy. I mean, how did men get control? How did women let them get
It's
control?
the biological burden
yeah.
that nature's God imposes on females. So they have the terrible death rate with pregnancies.
Until recently.
Right.
Yeah.
And so what's happened recently is they've been biologically liberated in many ways, and that's put them in the fore. But what sort of I'm getting into is one of the facts that might be happening, particularly in Palestine, where no one has a job. You have huge numbers of young males there. What am I going to do here? And all of these aggressive antediluvian instincts just flourish. I mean,
and I would point out here that I think that on the scale of the major world religions, that Islam is probably the most patriarchal of all of them, which I think feeds exactly into what you're saying.
Yes, and I mean we could get into a discussion about the religion, and that often, I mean, there's an argument to be said. I'm on the side of religion, that religion will cool things out. It'll be a way to deal with these terrible instincts, love thy neighbor, et cetera, et cetera. The universality of religion will cool things out, but if religions are at loggerheads with one another, then the whole circumstance gets really much more difficult. If one religion is saying, let's destroy the other people that believe this because they're Satan's army, we're going to destroy the other religion, and you get into these religious conflicts that might be something to be worried about, and presumably the religious heads as we're trying to say, well, the UN is a really hopped up UN would be a big thing, and maybe putting the religious card in the deck for just trying to maintain human understanding and brotherhood. I mean, that would be a useful thing, except when the religions decide the other guys are bad, and that's a real issue.
And that's ironic because all of the Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, are essentially based in ethics. I mean, not all religions are. You know, the fertility religions of the ancient world were all about doing what's necessary to make sure the crops grow, appease those gods. But the Abrahamic religions, are born on the trade routes when you're going to be dealing with strangers, and they all said, treat the stranger fairly, be nice to him. What goes around comes around. And yet over time, that's, the message has somehow become perverted into an us-them sort of thing. And you see these religions of brotherly love perverted into engines of terrible destruction on occasion.
Well, one role the United States has in this world dilemma, I think, is we're an exceptionalist country. We have lots and lots of different people here. And how well we can get everyone to get along, I mean, is a big issue. If we can do it, I think that could be a real message to everyone else. And the question is, how well can we do it?
Indeed.
Right. On that note, thank you again, Buck, and thanks
sir.
for those science fiction inputs there. That's quite good. Thank you.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.